Officials are suspending the investigation into the leak of a 2024 Wisconsin Supreme Court order on a case involving Planned Parenthood. Investigators say the draft order leak was intentional but could not identify any suspects in this case. As we've reported, the draft order showed the court would hear a lawsuit from Planned Parenthood that sought to declare access to abortion as a right protected by the state constitution. 62 people were interviewed during the investigation, including Supreme Court justices, commissioners, and judicial staff. Every one of those interviewees accessed the justice chambers or had knowledge of the order prior to the leak. Investigators recommended several changes to security to prevent such leaks from happening in the future. That includes improved document tracking and handling protocols, key card access and access to restricted areas, protocols surrounding email and printer usage, and guidelines with interns. Officials did not close the investigation, so it could be resumed if new information is discovered.